Well, to discuss what happens next, I'm joined now in the studio by Clive Baldwin, Senior Legal Advisor at Human Rights Watch, and from our Westminster studio by the Conservative MP, Julian Brazier. Well, Clive Baldwin first. I mean, the law really is an ass, isn't it? We want to get rid of him. Jordan wants to get their hands on him. What's the problem?
The problem is, as it's always been, what's going on in Jordan. Jordan's a country we work on, that we've documented the extensive use of torture. And despite all the pressure, that hasn't changed. It remains a country where torture is likely and the use of torture in evidence is likely.
Julian Brazier?
Good evening. The central problem here is the way in which the European Court of Human Rights has progressively lost its way.
Well, no, the problem is clearer than that, isn't it? The problem is potential torture.
No, the problem is that we've had a ruling some years ago that we can't hold people like Abu Qatada, who alleged there's no place they'd be safe to be sent, in prison. That's the fundamental problem. Up until about 10 years ago, people like this would have been held in what used to be called a prison with 3 walls, on the basis if they could find somewhere else to go, they could go. But because they were a serious threat to this state, they would have to be in prison, typically Belmarsh, if they couldn't find somewhere to go. That's why it's absolutely essential that we should review our human rights legislation, and I think we must consider actually withdrawing from the convention.
Well, David Cameron's pledged to tear up the Human Rights Act, but I mean, it's all stalled, isn't it, until after the election, potentially?
It's stalled because we can't get a consensus with our coalition partners, the Liberal Democrats, but I will be very glad indeed to see right at the heart of our manifesto a fundamental change in our attitude towards this. I mean, let's just remember, the European Convention was set up after the Second World War by people with the highest possible ideals to prevent the horrors of concentration camps and so on. But the people who set it up had just presided over the largest programme of judicial executions in British 20th century history, the Nuremberg trials. Yet today, this is a court which says, for example, you can't send anyone to a country where they might be executed. They've moved the goalposts. And this latest thing is not around the basis of Abu Qatada being likely to be tortured. Even the European Court has accepted that. It's about the possibility that if he was sent there, tainted evidence might be used in the trial.
Clive Baldwin?
This goes back long bit past the European Convention. This goes to the basic international ban on torture and the UN Convention on Torture, which nearly all states apply. And that convention, which is a very good one, was drafted, or helped to be drafted, and the UK signed up to by Margaret Thatcher's government. And it's that convention which says very clearly there should be no deportation to torture and there should be no use of evidence obtained by torture.
But Julian Brazier, in the absence of any agreement on the Human Rights Act, have you got any bright ideas on how to short-circuit this? I mean, as Simon Israel just said, it could be years before there's any deportation, if then. I mean, what about changing deportation laws more immediately?
The problem we've got is that the human rights framework in this country is making an absolute mockery of our ability either to deport or to imprison people who are a serious threat to the state. My view is that we should put a motion down to change this, and we should challenge the other parties to either vote for it or oppose it.
Clive
because
Baldwin,
public opinion is very clear on this.
It's been a basic principle of English law that the authorities can't just lock you up because they say you're dangerous. They have to put you on trial and convict you on the basis of evidence. So the human rights does stop the government locking you up for those reasons, but that will be a good sign. On deportation, it should be deportation only is prevented when there's no evidence of torture or the risk of evidence obtained by torture.
The ancient principle Mr. Baldwin refers to, that British citizens shouldn't be locked up without trial, was always on the basis that if people were not British citizens and they were persona non grata, they could be deported. That's what's changed.
But Julian Brazier, how has the Home Office let it come to this? Because back in April, Theresa May, the Home Secretary, was pretty confident she had these assurances from Jordan. How has your government got this so wrong?
Well, what happened was that the European Court produced this ruling which put yet another obstacle in the way, the use of tainted evidence. But nevertheless, it indicated that it looked as if Jordan was moving in the right direction. And it's a decision by a UK judge working to the human rights legislation which Tony Blair passed when he was Prime Minister, that they don't yet meet the yardstick. Now, we can go on talking to the Jordanian authorities, we can go on trying to finesse it, but the reality is that until relatively recently, a man like this would have been simply locked up in Belmarsh and told, if you can find a country to take you where you want to go to, you're free to go. But as long as you're in this country, we're not having you walking our streets.
Clive,
and that's what we need back.
How long do you think it will be, if ever, that we manage to deport Abu Qatada?
It depends on two issues. Either putting real pressure on the Jordanians to change their system fundamentally, so it abolishes torture and the use of evidence. It could do. Other countries have changed. Tunisia has changed dramatically, and now people can be deported back there. The government has done some good work in other countries in pressing them to abolish torture. It should do the same in Jordan.
Clive Baldwin, Julian Brazier, thank you very much for joining us. Krish.